23. And this is a question about pronouns, and the question becomes who or what. So who or what in this sentence produced ugly, low quality, or low resolution images? Well, the photographers aren't going to harump that they themselves make bad stuff. They're harumphing or being like, about the digital camera. Now, I heard somebody say digital cameras, which is true, but in the sentence, it's a single digital or the digital camera, sort of the single idea of digital camera, or I guess the original sort of entity, digital camera. So it can't be they or one or he or she. It has to be it, the digital camera. So who or what is the key to a question like 23. 24 says, why wouldn't they? Where are we going to put this this question? We're going to put it after sentence 1, or B says after 2, C says after 4, D says after 5. And I'm focusing on this word they. And again, who or what are we talking about? Who are they? Well, why wouldn't they is going to connect stuff before and after. That's what I'm noticing. And by the way, I don't have these questions memorized, so if you hear me slow down, it's because I'm trying to think about these questions the same way any student would or any test taker would. So I don't know precisely what's right yet, but I'm thinking about why wouldn't they, referring back to a group in the previous sentence, and then explaining itself after. Why wouldn't they? And then explaining, why they would. So it doesn't make sense between 1 and 2, because 1 is like, they're complaining about bad cameras. Why wouldn't they? Yet eventually, so we didn't explain that. So that's why wouldn't they complain? That's not a good spot for it. After sentence 2 makes more sense because it says, yet eventually the photographers gave in, right? So why wouldn't they? The latest digital cameras take great pictures, is what sentence 3 says. So why wouldn't they links the giving in, the using digital cameras to the explanation of why they should use the cameras. Okay, so I hope that was sufficient. Feel free to ask me more questions about that. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on. It says the writer is considering adding the following sentence. It's also labor intensive, involving several intricate steps. So this test, man, a lot of this little words mattering a lot here. It's like, okay, it's labor intensive. Wet paint. The process can be dangerous given that it requires the use of several volatile chemicals. It's also labor intensive. So it's dangerous and also labor intensive. Let's see if this makes sense to add. It serves as an effective transition. Reiterating the main point of the previous paragraph. No, the previous paragraph was about okay, digital camera, eventually those being great, but a few contemporary, looking at sentence 5, which is sort of like a thesis statement, end of the first paragraph. A few contemporary photographers, however, have embraced the anachronistic model that was the state-of-the-art technology in 1851, wet plate. So the main point of the previous paragraph, is that people have embraced wet plate photography, a few, but that's not the same thing as saying that the main point is that it's dangerous. So I'm going to cross off A. It's not the same idea as the previous paragraph. I don't know if it sets up the outline, because is the outline going to be like, it's dangerous and also labor intensive? Maybe. But I'll hold off on B, making a decision yet. It blurs the focus on the dangers involved in wet plate photography. Well, let's see. Does the next sentence talk about dangers? To take a wet plate photograph, photographs usually first arrange the pose. That's not about the danger. Mixing collodion. So it just talks about how labor intensive it is. So I don't like the idea that it blurs the paragraph. So C is out. It's not an opinion. Look, it's labor intensive, and they talk about all the labor involved. So that's why B is the best answer. It does set up the paragraphs outline. I was reading it as the passages outline, but it does set up the paragraphs outline of the process. It's labor intensive. Here's the process. Okay, so let's do the next one here. It's another one of these pronoun questions. So we're wondering about, so ITS apostrophe S, this means it is. This is possessive, singular, possess, singular, possessive. C is place, and then D is plural. So this is the word there, by the way, not place, but there meaning a place. And then there is plural possessive. So you know it's going to be one of these two most likely, because that's what the question's about. It wouldn't be just place when none of these other ones have to do with place, really. So it's probably singular possessive. And then the question, or plural possessive. So which one is it? Who or what subject? So again with this who or what thing. Who or what subjects to take? The photographers usually arrange or pose the photographers, plural, must be D. Okay, so let's look at number 27. So this question's about fanboys. So fanboys are people who are grown men who are obsessed with sports teams to the point where they act like very small children. Fanboys. No, fanboys is also a group of words, conjunctions, that can, with a comma, connect two full sentences. Independent clause, comma, fanboys, independent clause. So, for, and, nor, but, or, yet. I wrote O-R as in or. Yet, running out of room here, and then so. So, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are the fanboys. And then the question is really just which one works well here. Dried collodion, because all of them connect two full sentences, so we're not worried about grammar, we're just worried about ideas. Dried collodion is unusable once the photo is snapped with a massive tripod mounted. Whoa, sorry, I'm losing you there. The photographer has minutes to develop it. Okay, so the word is going to be so, because it's sort of like a cause and effect relationship. So oftentimes it's good with conjunction questions to label the, or to sort of categorize the answer choices. So of course, we just said so is kind of like therefore, right? One thing happened, so another thing happened. But is obviously contrasting ideas. And is obviously connecting, just like similar ideas, you might say, if but is a contrast. And then for is sort of like because. We are going to the movies, for we want to have a fun time tonight, or we won't go to that restaurant, for we don't want food poisoning. So this is sort of like because. Which is related to so, but they're just a little bit different. You could say, we don't want food poisoning, therefore we won't go to the restaurant. Or we won't go to the restaurant because we don't want food poisoning, right? So that would be sort of the relationship there. They're related. But if we were going to use the word for in this number 27, we would probably invert the sentence. And it's a pretty old-fashioned way of speaking, but something like, down on the next page, it's the end of the sentence is the photographer has just a few minutes to develop it, for the dried collodion is unusable, right? So that's how the word for would get used. Hopefully what I said makes sense. The word so is the best answer on number 27. All right, so number 28 actually wants to know about um, emphasizing how quickly these folks have to work. So if you say they have a few minutes, which is answer choice B, I'll start there. That you could be like, just give me a few minutes. It means a little bit of time. You know, it might take a few minutes. It could mean it doesn't emphasize that it's a short amount of time. A matter of minutes is sort of similar. It doesn't necessarily emphasize shortness. It could be short or long. It'd be like, it only takes a matter of minutes, or gosh, I thought it was going to take a second, but it was a matter of minutes, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean positive or negative. However, the word mere absolutely does mean a little amount, right? So mere minutes means that we're showing how quickly they have to work. And on these questions that give you a prompt, that is, it's not just answer choices, but like a specific question, the specifics of the prompt really matters. In this case, we're emphasizing quickly. Emphasize quickly. And that's the only one that does it. Nominal, again, sounds like not very many, but it also doesn't emphasize speed. It could be a handful of minutes at that point. So we're emphasizing quickness with 28. 29 is actually very similar to number 27 in that I want to categorize these. Obviously, conclusion means like, to finish a thought, right? So finishing an idea. And look, this isn't like you might have a slightly different take on how to classify these words. That's fine. The reason I'm classifying these words, let me be clear. On questions about conjunctions, it's easy to get confused and to pick the original. You would be very surprised, maybe, to learn that answer choice A, no change, is the most common mistake on conjunction questions. So that means that people are just sticking with the original. Why? Because your brain will make sense of whatever is in a sentence. This is why in some training that I once did in corporate America when I had a job in that world, they told me how to use the word "and" to change the tenor of a negative conversation, right? So I'll give you an example. If you could say, your report was great, but I need some more details. So that sounds negative. But if you say your report is great and I need more details, people go, wait, those are both good things, right? So the point is your brain makes a decision about what happens next based on the conjunction and changes the tone of the conversation. So if you read in conclusion in the original, it might just sound fine to you. You might be like, oh, that's how it works, right? So I'm noticing that A and B are pretty related, finishing and in the end. The difference between those is pretty close. That's what I'm writing. I'm writing finally as in the end, but you could really write that for in conclusion. It's probably not one of those then. I mean, there's a subtle difference, and I'll look at it, but thus is like therefore, and then nevertheless is sort of like to continue in spite of. So it's sort of like even though, or nonetheless is a phrase that means the same thing as this, and nonetheless means keep going, right? Even though. So I'll just write even though. So I classified these words. Now let's look at the sentences on their own. The sentence before says the photo is immersed in water and warmed. And then it says it is coated with lavender oil to give it a finish. It's definitely not because it's immersed in water and warmed, then you must give it lavender, right? And it's not like even though it is coated in lavender, right? So I do have to choose between these. But it's finally because we're talking about a process, not the conclusion of an idea. Right? So maybe this classification was slightly wrong, but that process is what you want to do. So it's like first this thing happens, then this other thing happens. Finally, it's coated in lavender, right? This is part of this process we were talking about of labor intensive, right? First you got to do this and then you got to do that. I know it doesn't say first and second, but we're talking about this process, and then at the end of the paragraph we get the conclusion of the process. Okay, so number 30. This is a good example of sort of a less is more situation. So let's see. I'm going to not pay attention to the word finally and just start with it is, because that's really all that matters. We have it is coated with lavender oil. That is an independent clause. But to give it a protective finish, the thing is, I'll just write 2 ... Whereas answer choice B might be more clearly wrong because you have the independent clause and then you have to give it a protective finish. To give it. So the best thing to say about this question is that less is more. It's, to explain to you what's wrong with each of these. I just wrote this wrong. This is, let me be careful here. This was actually B, and this is C, and now D is no punctuation at all, and A has this parentheses thing. The thing is, we don't need these parentheses. And in fact, if you use the parentheses, you would be able to read around the parentheses. So the sentence that's probably the most clearly wrong one, because read the sentence and skip the part in parentheses. It is coated with lavender oil to give it. No, to give it a protective finish is essential information to finish the sentence. So A is wrong. It is coated with lavender oil to give it a protective finish. Do we need to break those phrases up? I don't think so. To give it a protective finish further elaborates on the coating with lavender oil. But most importantly, just don't pick one with more punctuation unless it's absolutely vital that you have more punctuation. The simplest one is usually the best. And there are exceptions to that rule, but what you would do in those situations is cross off answers from a technical standpoint. Like, is there a reason that do we have 2 complete sentences that we need to separate? No. Okay. So feel free to ask me more questions about that question, but in the meantime, I'm going to move on to 31. This is a verb question. I see, swirl, will have swirled, have swirled, swirled. Okay, so I'm going to ask myself first, who or what? Because I don't know if this is actually about tense. It looks like it's about tense. Will have is in the future, like the past of the future. Will have. Like at that point, you will have done something in the past. Or have swirled is the past, or swirl is the present. Swirled is obviously also the past. Smudges swirl around the photo's edges. Will have. Okay, so this is about tense because smudges swirl, smudges will have swirled, smudges have swirled, smudges swirled. So none of the answers are a mismatch singular and plural. For instance, a mismatch would be smudges swirls. Smudges has swirled. That's wrong too, right? So try saying that 10 times fast. Anyways, this question is actually about tense. Only about 20% of the verb questions are actually about tense. So it's not about who or what. It's about the actual tense. And look, the sentences around it are your best clue. Flaws appear. Smudges swirl. Sunbursts or streaks emerge. So everything has that present tense. That's why A. So present tense. And it's all about context. We used context. Verbs in the surrounding area. You can even say context verbs. Anyways, 32. Interesting. So there's no prompt. So there's only a few things this could be. Either it's a misplaced modifier. That's like the example of, here, let me see if I can show you an example of that really quickly. Pardon me while I pull something up for you. I don't want to write it all out, so I'm just going to put it on the board. Here's some of my notes about grammar questions. Let me see if I can come up with my example here. Aha! These sentences right here, folks. Oops, let me zoom back out. The highlighted ones. Those are misplaced modifiers. The subject, scientists, it looks like scientists were the group that were long thought to live in New Mexico. That's wrong. Or in this sentence, it looks like a piano is walking down the street. So if you have modifiers, beginning of the sentence, dependent clauses at the beginning of the sentence, and then an independent clause, the dependent clause at the beginning must refer to the subject, or else what is it doing in that part of the sentence? If it's not referring to the subject, it should go somewhere else. Like scientists have found the gecko, comma, long thought to only live in New Mexico, comma, elsewhere. So if you put this phrase, long thought to live in New Mexico, next to gecko, that would be better. If you put walking down the street next to the me in some way, that would be better. Okay, so is this a misplaced modifier for number 32? No, because it's the whole sentence is underlined. So this is not what it is. The other two options are comparisons. So are we comparing two things? You can usually look for words like than or like ER, words like greater or less, or taller or shorter, or tallest or shortest. I don't see any of that kind of language. The third thing it could be is redundancy. These are the three categories of pure grammar questions. Ones without prompts, no prompt, that kind of look confusing. You don't know what they're actually asking. It's one of these three things. This is redundancy. Look, there's a really short answer, which is D, and A, B, and C all repeat information elsewhere. So the exposure time, let me look back and see. Since the film requires long exposures, moving subjects blur. So the exposure time in answer choice A is wrong. That same long exposure time is in B and in C. So the right answer is the one that is not redundant, right? So there's only three things that you'll see. Look, most non-prompt questions are about commas, or they're about word choice, or they're about, verbs. These are things that are clearly noticed by looking at the answer choices. A question like 32, it's not immediately clear what we're doing. And we want to know what we're doing because once we know the game that we're playing, then we have an easy set of rules to follow in the grammar section. So I don't know how many styles of question there are off the top of my head, but it can't be much more than 10. And so if you know what style of question you're playing, you can employ the specific rules for those styles of questions. In the case of no prompt, and it's none of the obvious things, it's one of these three: modifiers, comparisons, redundancy. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. It's a complicated idea. 33, we have a prompt. It says we want to highlight the contrast between Sternbach's techniques and the people they photograph. So contrast, highlight the contrast. Okay. So here's the reason A is out. We're talking about a technique that's very old school. So 19th century wave riders would be not a contrast. Ordinary people, maybe. Hard to tell that are subjects or surfers. I don't know, maybe. Let me read this again. None of these look good, so maybe A is right. Maybe I crossed it off too soon. So contrast the difference between the techniques and the people. Oh, it is A. Because the rest of the sentence says modern board shirts and bikinis they wear. So could be 19th century wave riders if not for the modern clothes. That's the contrast between the way they look in the photos because of the style of photo, these old styles, and the modern looks, right? So in most cases, you're looking for something very specific on these questions. So in the reading section, specifics can get you into trouble. You want to use specifics to eliminate answer choices. In grammar questions, how are they going to make one question objectively, or one answer objectively right and the other one's objectively wrong? Well, in this case, they needed to specifically answer the question that we need to highlight the contrast between these two groups. Saying they could be just any random person, which is, B, and C, look, they're kind of the same. B says they could be ordinary people. C says it's hard to tell that they're these special kinds of people. D says they could be anybody, right? So B, C, and D are all like the same in an important way that makes them all wrong because it doesn't highlight the contrast. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so number 34. So if you're like most students that I work with, test 9 is a test you've done after a handful of other tests. And you've seen in a lot of cases these add, delete, revise sentences. Should we add this thing? Is what they're asking. Which is cities by excavating artifacts that have accumulated over centuries of land development. Should we add this? We have a couple yeses and a couple nos. And you may have heard me say that you don't want to rely on the yeses and nos at the beginning. You're making assumptions that you know whether you should add or subtract or add or delete it or not add it, whatever. You're making assumptions without having the full reasons that you might think about adding or subtracting it. You want to look at the explanations before you just eliminate answers, right? So, if you look through you've also probably seen a bunch of these questions where the answer is don't add it because it's random. And there's no answer that says that here, which is interesting and important. There's no answer that says don't add it because it's random. It says it doesn't give enough detail in answer choice C about the kinds of artifacts. That's not a good reason to not add something. That's like saying, oh, well, don't add this because you need to add something else that gives us more details. It's like, no. I mean, even if you want more details, wouldn't you want some details if you want more details? Right? So that's why C is wrong. And D, the same thing. Doesn't explain how it benefits the city's history. Why does this one spot have to show why it benefits the city's history? We don't see any argument beforehand that says, it obviously benefits the history, because in that case, you would have to give reasons or examples. But that's not a good reason not to add it. So I don't like either of the reasons for C and D, even if I didn't want to add it. And B is wrong because it doesn't set up the character. It doesn't identify characteristics, right? What characteristics are in there? It's implied that there's been the characteristic of the city is that there's been land development over centuries. Sure, that's in this additional information in question 34, but that's not specific characteristics that we've identified. There's a suggestion that one of the characteristics would be centuries of land development, but it's not explicit about identifying that. So look at A. It sets up the passage by explaining what these folks do. Yeah, and look, this is a question. Maybe you have to go do some more reading to answer this question. Maybe you start and come back to it after you've done other questions. That's totally fine. But the rest of the passage does talk about these urban archaeologists, just digging stuff up. And if someone says, well, look, why do we have to describe that they dig something up? Why is that important? Well, all it says so far is that an urban archaeologist studies the history of cities. That's just a historian. An urban archaeologist is someone way more specific than just studying the city. They dig stuff up. Okay. Moving on. I guess before I move on, let me just say it's still true that, probably half or maybe even more than half the time the right answer is don't add it because it's random. That just wasn't the case here. Answers like it blurs the focus of the paragraph, or it's, unnecessary or something like that. That's certainly right about half the time, though I'll guard against those mistakes in the science kind of passages. You may have seen one of those earlier in the test. And, I won't dwell on this too long, but I think I want to just point your attention to the question that's sort of like this earlier in the test, where you do also add the material and not just delete it. It's question 11. So backing up here, I'll just write C number 11, because you don't end up picking the answer that's just don't add it because it's random or irrelevant. That's wrong in this case. All right, so now we're on to 35. Okay, so for 35, so I'm just getting there now, we have verbs, right? Are, have been, both plural, is singular, were plural. It's probably the one that's different from the rest. Let's see. Who or what? So it could be about tense, because look, the difference between are and have been and were is, are is the present tense, have been is the the more recent past, and were is the more distant past, is the outlier here. And the reason I think it's right is because who or what is required? It's any New York City construction project. And what I do when I see the word any or every or nobody, anybody, anybody, you could also say anyone, everyone, no one. So anyone, everyone, no one. All singular because they say one in them, right? So I emphasize that to myself. I say any one New York City construction project is required. So there's extra information in between, but the subject, who or what is required, any one New York City construction project. Using municipal funds, but it's still a project, any one project. So if you simplify the subject, simplify the who or what. Simplify. There's an I in there. Simplify. Or simplify. No. Sorry. Bad joke. Anyways. 36. Okay. So look, 36 is an example of another one of those prompt questions where it's not quite obvious what's going on. Except A, B, and C all do the same thing, which is they add information that means the same thing as possibly. So it says that, and if that possibility exists, so there's like this conditional if, potentially it is necessary that, and or is possible, those are all the same, I think. Let me double check here. And if that possibility exists, an urban archaeologist might be consulted. Yes, that's perfect. So redundancy. I've seen a couple of those now. So this is that thing where, you have no prompt, right? So, this is just like, to be clear, this is just like number 32. See number 32. Okay, cool. 37. Okay, 37 is another one of these conjunction questions. There's a lot of these here. So we've talked about therefore, cause and effect. I'll just write cause and effect. Maybe that doesn't help you. Okay, therefore is like one thing leads to another thing. Though could mean like go in the opposite direction. So I'll just write contrast. You're not like writing these down while you're doing the test. You're just in your head trying to classify them. Meanwhile means same time. And there's nothing official about the way I'm doing this. Similarly means the same. So I'll read the sentence above and below, and I won't read the original therefore. As the work continues, oh, tricky. If you see one of these words between two commas and not at the beginning of the sentence, it's still linking. I'll call this sentence 2. It's still linking sentence 1 and sentence 2, the sentence before and after. So therefore is not connecting this part as they worked to the team. That's my shorthand. As they, and that's not what it's linking. It's not linking those. It's linking the previous sentence. The previous sentence is, gosh, it's a long sentence. Oh, it's our job to document and recover the history before it's lost. It's our job. It's our job to document and recover the history before it's lost. As the work continued, the team faced obstacles. So we have a job, and then we have obstacles. That's not therefore. It's our job, therefore we have obstacles. No. It's our job, but, or contrast, we had obstacles. It's our job. At the same time, we have obstacles. I mean, close, but it's our job. Similarly, we have obstacles. No. But this one's close. Meanwhile, people will pick meanwhile, and I get it. It's like, it's our job. She says this thing. Meanwhile, something else happened, right? People could see that. But what you want is the most explicit association. This is why I didn't rely on sound, because relying on sound God, can I spell words? Sound. On sound, this looks good. See? But the word though is the contrast between it's our job to do this and then we face obstacles. Explicitly, like the conjunction should be doing some real work and not just sounding good. Right? So it links the idea of we have a job to do and then we can't do our job, we're facing obstacles, or it's hard to do our job. So as the work continued is sort of already doing the work of meanwhile, which is to say like at this time. So that's a challenging one, but I've learned that if I'm choosing between two answers that sound really good, I can't lean on sound. I have to lean on function. So maybe the explicit function. Function. Can I spell words? I don't think I can. I think the jury is in on that one. I can't spell words well. Explicit function. Contrast. That's what we want. Okay. 38. Punctuation. We have A with a long dash. Let me give myself a little bit more room here. A with a long dash, B with a semicolon, C with a comma, D with nada. Nothing. Okay. So a long dash, the requirement is full sentence up front and then whatever after. That's why I'll start with B, because B is requiring a full sentence. Semicolon needs a full sentence on both sides. Well, let's just see if there's a full sentence up front, because if it isn't, then we can get rid of A and B. Let's see. Oh, that's complicated. There's a lot of stuff here. But look, wow, that is a very complicated sentence. I'm going to diagram the whole thing, starting with field work, right? Field work in the city has to be done intermittently. Independent clause, colon. Anytime you see something that can follow, that can like finish a sentence, then it's a reset. Anything can come after this, right? Oh, by the way, colons are the same as long dashes. So, field work in the city has to be done intermittently. Okay, that's a reset. The construction crew had to proceed one block at a time to avoid interrupting traffic. That's another full sentence. By the way, hey, I've got to tell you something. That's my little game, remember? If you didn't hear it already, here you go. I got to tell you something. If you walk into a room and you say, hey, I got to tell you something, and then try out the thing you're wondering is a full sentence or not. If you told them something, it's a full sentence. So I'll give you an example. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Field work in the city has to be done intermittently. That's a full sentence. I told you something. Hey, I got to tell you something. The construction crew had to proceed one block at a time to avoid interrupting traffic. Random, but you told me something. Now we have comma and, so we need another full sentence. Hey, I've got to tell you something. The archaeology team's work was periodically halted. That is a full sentence. The next part is not, however. Hey, I've got to tell you something. By stormy weather and the discovery of toxic materials underground. What? By? Try it again. Hey, I've got to tell you something. What is it? By stormy material. God. Hey, I've got to tell you something. What is it? By stormy weather and the discovery of toxic materials underground. What were you going to tell me? Anyway, so that's wrong. So B is out. We don't have two full sentences because this part wasn't a full sentence. Now, this is tricky, but it goes back to the idea that I had earlier, which is don't add it unless you need it. And the technical reason why D is right is because by stormy weather, by is a preposition. It's part of a big, huge, long list of words that include words like in, on, for, from, to, at, under, over, near. These are all prepositions. You usually don't separate a preposition and the prepositional phrase. The prepositional phrase is what comes after by. So by stormy weather, etc. You don't separate that from the words that it modifies. What is by stormy weather? What is by stormy weather modifying? It's modifying the way it was periodically halted. So we won't break that up. Okay, so I'm going to rip through these because I got to go in just a couple minutes here. So number 39 is another one of these questions that's not clear what it's about at first, but see words like that of in answer choice D. That lets me know it's about comparisons. So what are we comparing? The noise of construction vehicles and horns and... Oh, it's not comparisons, it's redundancy. I knew it was one of those two. That of pedestrians, noise of construction vehicles, car horns, and pedestrians. This is the list. Everything in the list has to be the same. C. When we say that of, look at that of in D, the noise of in B, and then noise in A. They're all wrong for the same reason, because we already said noise. So C is right. This is redundancy. Moving right along. 40. This is about punctuation. So look, I can cross off A and D because a semicolon and a period and no other changes are exactly the same. And I can tell you that that means that they weren't two full sentences originally, which means that C is perfect because all you did is make one change. You said it's not two full sentences. I know it's not two full sentences because you can't have a period and a semicolon. Those would both work if there were two full sentences. So they're both they're both there. So we know we can't be made to choose between the two of them. Both of them are therefore wrong. And now I know what the question's about. So the problem with B is we make two corrections, and that leads to a new mistake. The new mistake is a comma in between two full sentences. We have the full sentence ending with the word site. The archaeologists discovered thousands of objects that, and then among these were buttons and other stuff. Those are both two full sentences. So if you make two changes to something where you only need one change, like you could have used a period or a semicolon if you just said among these were. So two changes led to a new mistake. Two wrongs don't make it right. That's the way I remember those questions. The 41 asks for the example in the next sentence. What is the example? Or in the following sentence, yeah. So they're going to great lengths to secure fresh drinking water, laying wood pipes and doing all this stuff. So it's not rituals. I just noticed that in B. It's about work. Public utility planning, infrastructure development, maybe. Financing, it's not about financing. It's not materials because it's not just about, the only materials it mentions is wood. So it's public utility planning and infrastructure development because that covers the entire example in the following sentence. Ripping through these because I'm already late. Couple more. Style and tone, it's always going to be the formal answer. And these, or like the one that stands up in the pack, if there's three extremely formal ones, then it'll be the one that's like sort of more normal. But I haven't seen that yet, actually. So look, blood, sweat, and tears is, or hassle, or feats of strength and fortitude are kind of silly or dramatic. Effort is just straightforward, formal. Okay. 43, misplaced modifier. Through such discoveries, that was like long thought to only live in New Mexico. So remember this thing? Let me pull it up. Same thing. Notice the subject is what we have to change. It's the underlined part. So pause the video if you need to look at that. I'm going to keep going. Who or what? So this is 43. Who or what are we talking about? Archaeologists. We don't know who they are, I don't think. It's not the colonial era New Yorkers who are telling the history now. It's the archaeologists. It's not we. And unless it says, yeah, it's got to be the urban archaeologists. They can't have it just say they, because the previous sentence doesn't end with the words urban archaeology or something, or urban archaeologists. Okay, so 44, last one. Illustrates the broad impact. So broad impact. A is specific to one person's life. B doesn't talk about impact. It just says that New York's construction is annoying. New York City's history becomes real, probably. D is about technique, so that's wrong. The A would be between A and B because we're talking about impact, but A is about one single person. C is about making the entire New York City history real. Okay, I gotta go. I hope that was helpful. Please let me know anything that you want further clarification on or something that you disagree with me on. That's totally cool. Let me know. I hope to see you soon. Happy studying. Take care.